Now for our new conversation, a conversation with our two future leaders, which are on stage, Nassim from the Policy Center for the New South, Morocco, a coordination office, and Natalia Lariceva, future business leader from EMEA, Senior Manager Design for Sustainability, Central Planning and TRS. I told her that I was talking with Tomago Mart last night, and he came to me and said, you know, Paolo, I'm sitting at the dinner, I have two future leaders on my side, left and right. They told me their job title, and I did not understand what they do. And we, being old a little bit, we don't even understand what you do. And Natalia told me that you...
That I'm responsible that all the future innovation of my company and the product will be sustainable.
No? Now, great. Great. But let me extend a very warm welcome to Gita Wirjawan. I think I pronounce your name in a terrible way. Hi, Gita, would you excuse me if I call you with your first name, which is much easier for Italian? We met a few months ago, and I was, if you remember, extremely impressed by your presentation at the conference, and so we are happy to have you with us today. Gita is the former Minister of Trade of Indonesia and founder and chairman of Ancora Capital. Thank you for joining us today. Can we hear your voice to check the microphone?
Can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Okay.
As you know, you will have a conversation with our two future leaders, but let me take the opportunity and ask myself a question. Gita, we have been discussing quite a lot in the public conference, but also in the parallel meetings of decoupling and de-risking with China. Huge debate. Can I ask you your brief comment on this issue from your view from Indonesia?
I think this was something that a lot of us would have anticipated since some years ago as a result of the burgeoning of, regional economies, call them China, India, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, Indonesia, Nigeria. So inevitably, we from the developing economies, I think, would have anticipated some degree of revisionism to the way the global order would basically unfold in the coming years, as we're witnessing today. And I can say that, by way of the decoupling between China and the US, this is, I think, an episode that we all have to get used to, at least for many of us in Asia, if not most of us in Southeast Asia. We're feeling it, but we're adjusting to how things are changing. And I think a lot of us in Asia, sort of like sense that there is this inevitable regional hegemonic tendencies that are taking place, by way of what China wants to do or by way of what the United States wants to do in the Asia Pacific, as a result of which I'm foreseeing, I think, some sort of a redefinition or a recalibration of the core strategic interest of the US, which would have been traditionally just with respect to Europe, the Western Hemisphere, the Middle East, and Northeast Asia. So at the rate that China is expected to be regionally hegemonic with respect to Asia Pacific, I think it's important to note that it's not an impossibility for the US to redefine, its core strategic interest as to include all of East Asia, which would include not just Northeast Asia, but Southeast Asia. So this is one observation that we're seeing as a result of this potential, if not actual, decoupling between China and the United States. The other, as a result of this revisionist tendency, we have seen in the last few years, the world or the global order having become more multipolar. It was unipolar since 1989 till probably the mid-2000s or the early 2000s, but things have gotten a lot more multipolar. Ironically, as a result of the global order having become more multipolar, multilateralization has become much more difficult to do. Multilateralization was a lot easier to do at a rate and at a time when the global order would have been much more unipolar, because there was only one guy that basically would tell everybody what to do. But now at the rate that there are so many regional powers, as a result of this regional power states making sure that the global order would become more multipolar, multilateralization is much more difficult to do. And as a result of that, the world, from an economic collaboration standpoint, is becoming a bit more, if not a lot more, plurilateral, if not bilateral. That, I think, entails the need and necessity for each nation state to basically improve upon its marginal productivity. So in sum, I think the decoupling is real, and we just have to get used to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Gita. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Now let's move, I'm afraid we have a time issue at this meeting because we have all connection with all over the world. So we have, and I ask your help as well, we have to be fast but deep as you were in the first question. You have the floor, Nassim.
So my question is, globalization and its rules were created by today's mature economies. With the world economic power shifting today, what do you think the global south or the new south, what role will it have, and what's the fate of globalization in this context?
And this in 2 minutes, Gita, you know, this would be a 2 weeks conference organized by ISPI and Bocconi, but you have 2 minutes, and that's why we invited you. You are so great.
I think there's a great opportunity for the global south as a result of this revisionism that we've been witnessing. I think India wants to make a statement, China wants to make a statement, South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, and all the rest, right? But I think there are 2 important additional headwinds that must be noted and recognized by everybody, not just those in the south. The first one is really the internet. Right. The internet was supposed to democratize information and consequently democratize ideas. But what we have seen was, the democratization of information became so real, but it didn't entail the democratization of ideas in a commensurate manner. What we have witnessed in the last few decades would have been a polarization of ideas. And I think polarization of ideas is not very healthy for the purposes of, governments or leaderships anywhere being able to select talent on the basis of meritocracy. As a result of which, I think we have seen many leaders, if not leaderships, all over the world, in both developing and developed economies, choosing talent a lot more based on loyalty and or patronage at the expense of meritocracy. So if the global south were to continue upon this track, I think it runs into some risks or headwinds. The second headwind is, I think, AI. Artificial intelligence, I think, is something that we all have gotten, a little bit more familiar with, but we've seen that it has been only in the hands of the elites. So as at the rate that internet and artificial intelligence will continue to elitize and polarize societies, I think it becomes a headwind for the global south to basically, in the context of whatever it wants to do going forward. So I think once we recognize that, once we remedy that by way of reducing the educational disparity within each respective society of the global south, I think we have a chance. If not, I think we're going to have a tough time.
Thank you. Thank you. And now it's Natalia, it's you.
Yeah.
Please, Natalia.
Can you hear me? Yes. Before, I would like to thank you, ISPI, Bocconi University, and all the partners for organizing this important event and forum for us, future leaders. And personally, I'm super grateful that I have opportunity to ask my question to the Mr. Wirjawan. And my short question is, meritocracy is or should be the feature of the liberal democracies and the key tool for growth. At the same time, the current today's growth show us that the growth is higher or even higher with another regime. Does it mean that there is a game over for the meritocracy that, as we know?
Well, let me just point out that meritocracy has been largely an attribute of a liberal democracy, but it also has been an attribute of an autocracy. We call that China. I think when Deng Xiaoping decided to embark upon, this massive reform since the late 70s until in the early 2000s, we have seen China being able to basically meritocratize its leadership and governance in the context of entrepreneurship, politics, and policies, and what have you, at both the national and the regional levels. This is something that I think has been, characteristic of an autocracy in a very unusual manner, where, we have only seen meritocracy as an attribute of a liberal democracy. But at the same time, we've also seen many liberal democracies around the world, being able to or having chosen talent a lot more on the basis of what I alluded to earlier, which is called loyalty and or patronage. And this would have been a discount. So we have seen many liberal democracies around the world that have been able to select talent a lot more based on meritocracy as opposed to loyalty and or patronage. But we've also seen other liberal democracies choosing talent a lot more based on patronage and or loyalty, as a result of which there would have been less growth trajectory than what we would have seen in other liberal democracies that would have chosen talent a lot more based on meritocracy. So the key going forward is to make sure that if you want to be a liberal democracy, it's not just about the distribution of power to the hands of many, but it has to be about the distribution of other essential public goods, such as integrity, morality, intellect, healthcare, welfare, moral value, and social value. These are, I think, essential public goods that would have been manifested in a country that may have not been deemed as a liberal democracy, such as Singapore. Singapore, I think, arguably could qualify as some sort of a liberal democracy because it has been able to distribute power to the hands of many, despite the fact that it hasn't given space and voice to the opposition and the media as much as we would have wanted to. But they have been able to basically distribute other essential public goods, such as welfare, healthcare, intellect, integrity, all that good stuff that I've mentioned. So I think we have to be mindful of liberal democracy being able to select talent a lot more based on meritocracy as opposed to patronage and or talent in order for a liberal democracy anywhere to be able to sustain growth trajectory.
Thank you, Gita. I think the issue of meritocracy and how it is declined in a regime or liberal democracy, it's a key issue that we at the Future Leader Global Policy Forum, we should address more. And so I'm grateful that you mentioned that and you mentioned this. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us. What's the time in Indonesia now? It's quite late, isn't it?
I'm actually in Palo Alto. I'm teaching at Stanford at the moment. So yeah, it was at 6 o'clock, but I wake up really early, Paolo.
Okay, so a big applause to Gita for being with us. Thank you, Gita. Thanks, you very
Paolo.
much.
The panel.
Thank you. Now, we are exactly half of the afternoon. And can we turn on the lights? Possiamo accendere le luci?